All right, let's talk about something that's super critical for any solar setup, but honestly, it gets overlooked all the time. I'm talking about choosing the right cable size. It might not sound like the most exciting topic, but trust me, getting this wrong can lead to some seriously dangerous problems.
So I've got to ask you, is your solar system secretly suffering? You can have the absolute best panels on the market, a top-of-the-line inverter, the whole shebang. But if the wires connecting everything are wrong, you're not just leaking power, you could be creating a massive safety hazard without even having a clue.
Because that's really the bottom line here. A cable that's too small, well, it's the silent killer of your entire solar investment.
So let's really dig into this idea of a silent killer. It's not a flashy problem that's going to make a bunch of noise or set off alarms right away. But getting this one little detail right is absolutely crucial for the safety, the efficiency, and, the long life of your entire setup.
This is the perfect way to think about it. Imagine a wire is a road, and the electricity, the current, is all the traffic. Now, what happens if you try to funnel all the cars from a 10-lane superhighway onto a tiny little country lane? You get a massive traffic jam, right? Things get hot, frustrated, and nothing moves the way it should. It is the exact same thing with electricity in a wire that's too small. And that electrical traffic jam, it has some pretty nasty real-world consequences. First up, voltage drop. This basically means the power that leaves your panels never fully makes it to your batteries. You're just losing it along the way. Second, and this is the really scary part, all that congestion creates a ton of heat. I'm talking melt the insulation, create a fire risk kind of heat. It all adds up to a huge loss of power and can even permanently damage your expensive equipment.
Okay, so we get the danger, but how do we actually get it right? Well, the good news is, it all boils down to just three main sizing factors. If you can wrap your head around these simple principles, you can figure out the perfect cable size for any part of your system.
And here they are. It's pretty simple, really. Number 1, current, which we measure in amps. Number 2, distance, the length of the cable run. And number 3, your system voltage. You nail these three and you're golden. Let's start with current.
Now, when it comes to current, here's the absolute most important thing to understand. Not all amps in your system are created equal, not even close. The juice coming from your solar panels might only be, say, 10 or 20 amps. But the current flowing between your batteries and your inverter, whoa, we are talking a massive 100, 200, maybe even more amps. And that is exactly why those battery cables are so thick and beefy. They're handling literally 10 times the electrical traffic.
All right, next up is factor number 2, distance. And this one, well, it just kind of makes sense, right? The longer that electrical road is, the more energy you're going to lose just getting from point A to point B. That's the voltage drop we were talking about. And it's why a short 5-foot cable can be much thinner than a 50-foot one, even if they're carrying the exact same current. Distance always matters.
And that brings us to our third factor, system voltage. Now this is where things get a little weird, a bit counterintuitive. You'd think a higher voltage system would need thicker wires, right? Nope, it's actually the opposite. A lower voltage system, like a 12-volt setup, needs thicker cables than a high-voltage 48-volt system. So why is that? Well, to deliver the same amount of power, that 12-volt system has to push a way higher current. And as we now know, higher current always demands a thicker wire. Okay, so that's enough of the theory. How does this all actually translate to the system you're building in your home or your RV? Let's get practical and jump right into a quick sizing guide with some real-world recommendations you can use.
For your solar panels, the sizing is thankfully pretty straightforward. Look, a 4mm squared cable might work for 1 or 2 panels, but honestly, 6mm squared is really the go-to standard for most setups. It just gives you a great safety margin. You'd really only need to jump up to a 10mm squared cable for super long runs, or if you're connecting a whole bunch of panels in parallel, which really jacks up the current.
Now for the heavy hitters, the battery cables. This is the one place where you absolutely positively cannot afford to cut corners. The cable size here is tied directly to your inverter's power. Even a small 1 kVA inverter needs a hefty 16 mm square cable. Jump up to a pretty common 3 kVA inverter, and you're already looking at 25 mm square. And for any serious 5 kVA setup or larger, you're in the 35 to 50 mm square range. These cables are thick for a very, very good reason. So knowing the right sizes is half the battle, for sure. But avoiding the common mistakes, well, that's the other half. Let's run through 4 costly pitfalls that can really compromise your system's efficiency and, more importantly, its safety. First up, trying to save a few bucks on a smaller wire.
It's a false economy that'll cost you way more in lost power down the road. Second, just completely forgetting to account for distance. A long run needs a thicker cable, period. Third, and this is a big one, never use your leftover solar panel wire for your batteries. It just cannot handle that massive current. And finally, a poor connection. Even the perfect cable is totally useless if it's not securely terminated with the proper lugs.
So, if you only take one single thing away from all of this, let it be the engineer's golden rule. This is the piece of advice you need to remember when you're standing in the store trying to make that final decision.
And the rule is best explained with this one last analogy. Are you trying to move your precious solar energy through a tiny little drinking straw, or are you giving it a wide-open pipe to flow through? The straw is inefficient and puts a ton of stress on your system. The pipe allows for a smooth, effortless, and safe flow of that energy.
Which brings us to the crucial point, the golden rule itself. When in doubt, always go bigger. You can never, ever get in trouble for using a cable that's too thick. Sure, it might cost a little more up front, but it is always the safer, more efficient, and more reliable choice to protect your investment in the long run.
And that leaves us with one final question for you. As you look at your own system or the one you're planning to build, just ask yourself, is your wiring a pipe or is it a straw? Thanks for joining me.